So, firstly, thank you very much for accepting my invitation and accepting to be on my show.
It's a pleasure.
So, I thought to tell about you and the work you are doing to my audience. So, can you please introduce? I thought to tell about you and your work to my audience. Can you please introduce yourself to my audience?
Sure. So my name is Shai Almog. I'm the developer advocate of Lightrun and co-founder of Codename One, as well as a couple of other companies in the past. I've been a professional developer for around 30 years or so. That means literally when I started programming as a job, not when I started programming, which was much earlier than that. I guess I'm older than I look. At least over Skype. In person, you can see the age more clearly. I've been a speaker at quite a few conferences, wrote a couple of books, wrote a lot of open source code, mostly in mobile, mostly in Java, very active in the Java community since essentially the first beta. I've started writing articles about it back then, worked at Sun Microsystems for about a decade, ran a consulting company for about a decade, that sort of stuff. So, mostly I'm old.
So you are into IT from long time.
Pardon?
So you are into IT from long time.
Yeah, I've been around the block for a while. Yeah.
So how can you able to manage all this? You're a speaker, you're an author, and you're a co-founder of of a company, and you're a developer advocate.
You're doing one thing, and then you're doing another and another, and over time, experience sort of piles up. If you've been doing it for long enough, you just end up doing lots of things simply because you've been around long enough. To be fair, I do have more of work under my belt, mostly because I was an entrepreneur and I was a consultant for a long time. So when you're a consultant, it's kind of like a crash course, because you're walking into a company and you need to be both the smartest person in the room and also not antagonize the people that you're there to help, because they're paying you a consulting fee, which is a pretty big amount, and you need to prove that you're worth that amount of money and that you know what you're doing. But it's their project. You can't insult the people that you came to consult to, so you need to build them up and not tear them down. So there's also a big human aspect to that process, and that's a very difficult balance beam to walk on, where you need to have a very high level of skills and you're constantly tested on your skill level. And also you need to communicate well with people who sometimes don't really want you to succeed because they feel that you're stepping in on their territory. So I did that for over a decade, and I think that really helped my career in the long term, even though it was difficult and exhausting and frustrating, because you're never really part of a company. You're a consultant. You're sort of like a nomad in a sense. But it's kind of like a boot camp. When you're done with it, you have a level of experience you can't possibly get in any other way. And I credit a lot of my progress as a developer and as a human being to some degree, because a lot of developers, especially when they start off, have a lot of ego. I definitely have a lot of ego still. But letting go of that and being able to communicate with people with whom you sometimes disagree is, I think, core to being a good developer, a good manager, and a good employee overall, and also a good human being, because you need to communicate with people you care about, who sometimes might not be in their best circumstances. And that's a skill you can just pull out of your bag and use in pretty much any sort of situation. I find myself managing my kids sometimes, sort of scheduling them and negotiating them. I try to keep that down, because it's still an emotional connection, not a technical one. But sometimes you need those technical advantages with kids. So that's also an important life skill.
So you are communicating with machine and as a developer, and you're communicating with human beings, and how you are able to manage both. It is very important for you to be very very keen observer in order to make this possible, and in order to make things work in a smooth way. How this possible, how you made this possible, and what are the key points that made you to make you get success?
So I think the key point is keeping frustration down, both mine and the other parties' frustration, because basically both machines and people are more forgiving than we sometimes give them credit. If I don't understand something, I can ask a person, I can Google it today, which is something that didn't exist when I started off, but you can find out what problem the machine has, and you can find out what problem a person has when you talk and genuinely listen. And that was actually surprisingly a difficult thing for me as an engineer, to listen properly, to shut up for a second and try to understand what the other party actually was asking for, and let go of my ego. Obviously, that's something that's specific to me. It's different for every person. But opening your eyes and ears is universal, whether you're connecting with code and trying to understand it, whether you're connecting with a specific problem in an architectural domain, or if you're trying to connect to another person, listening to their grievances, accepting that even if they're technically wrong in your opinion, they still have an opinion and emotions, and those might be valid and have validity, even if I think they're not as important. So when someone says, I feel undervalued, or that I don't contribute to the team as much, that's a feeling that they have. I can say, look, I value you the most, but that's not enough. That's a feeling, that's the objective reality as I see it, not something that a teammate or a subordinate would necessarily feel in that way. So I need to listen to how they feel and help them deal with the problem, not necessarily always try and offer a solution that essentially erases their feelings, because that's a type of mistake to make with human beings, unlike, say, with a computer, where you do want to fix a problem. With people, you need to sort of work together to solve that problem. And by the way, when we're talking about problems in computers, they're often problems of asking the right questions to the right people. So, I don't necessarily know everything, and having a team is part of the thing, not necessarily finding everything and trying to solve everything and being everything for everyone. And that's a big thing, being able to work with someone and ask the right questions and not be embarrassed about being stupid. And that's something that I got with old age, because as a younger guy, I'd always think, okay, I need to solve everything, I need to do everything, I need to implement everything, I need to know every single line of code in every project that I'm working on. And this isn't tenable in the long run. And it's not the most effective way of doing things, because I didn't evolve as well as I should have, because I didn't pick up new things from other people as fast as I would have. And today I'm more open about asking stupid questions. And the type of questions I see lots of times, beginners being embarrassed about asking things, feeling, oh, people will think I'm stupid. And I ask these questions all the time because I'm not great with certain technology X, Y, or Z. And the difference is I'm old and I'm not embarrassed by it. It's kind of something that got pulled out of me with time. And younger people need to, inexperienced people need to let go of that embarrassment. It's okay to ask questions. It's a basic part of learning, especially in our field where there's so much to learn. It's just technically completely untenable to know even remotely close to everything. It might have been possible when I was younger. It's no longer the case.
So, Lightrun Tech, where this thought came from and what made you to work on this?
So, I was introduced to the guys at Lightrun by Eran Varnunu, who was the CEO of the Sun Israel Development Center. So I worked with him at Sun, and he said, look, there's these two guys that are founding this company, and you should really talk to them. It's an interesting company, and I listened to essentially people who like that, who definitely know their stuff. And so I went to a meeting with them, and they showed me the product, essentially a very early draft of the product, and explained the concept. And that blew me away. The concept, for those of you who aren't necessarily familiar with Lightrun, this is effectively a production debugger. You can debug your code on the servers in production using tools that are designed for this production environment. So you don't stop on a breakpoint like you would locally. You take a snapshot, which looks like a breakpoint. You get a stack trace, you get variable values, so you can go over the stack trace and see what happened. But the thread doesn't stop there, it keeps running, it doesn't break. That's why we call it a snapshot. So you can get everything that you could from a breakpoint, but without actually breaking, and you can learn stuff. Now, you can do it conditionally. So if, say, a specific user is having a problem with your system, you can place a snapshot with a conditional breakpoint, like you would a conditional breakpoint, at a specific point, and see what he's seeing in terms of variables, in terms of stack, and everything, and literally dig into the code to understand the problem that a specific user or a specific server might be having. You can inject new logs into the code. So for instance, lots of times we have too many logs and then we have this huge billing problem, or we have too few logs, and then you don't know what's going on. Oh, if only I had a log line here. Now I need to redeploy everything and go through QA for 2 hours or a day to get a new deployment out there. So instead of that, you can just inject a log and see what's going on, again, with conditions and only for specific user if you want, etc. So, and metrics, you can also measure the time that a method takes or a block of code takes at that level of granularity as a programmer. Now you have APMs, but they're very big. They're essentially designed to catch the entire web service and stuff like that, not to catch a specific line of code. That just doesn't exist. Something that's equivalent to a debugger in the cloud, in your server, literally. So I got introduced to that concept and saw the demo, which is impressive, very bare bones back then, and literally it was just the two founders. And I was impressed by them as people. They're actually much younger than I am, which is also very cool, and I like working in that relatively younger environment. And we hit it off and said, let's try working together and see how it goes. And I started as a developer, actually, just writing the code and trying to get everything off the ground. I was literally the first non-founder developer, or the second one, depending on how you count it. And I just wrote most of the code for the server, the plugin, the CLI, There's really, when you're one of the first people in the company, you just write everything. So I did a lot of that for a while, and it's pretty cool. I'm really happy about the way the product turned out, and it was literally less than 2 years ago that, actually not less, exactly 2 years ago, that we started that whole process, and the product's absolutely amazing and taking off like a forest fire in terms of the way that our customers are completely enamored with it. So it very much matches what I feel. And one of the things that when they showed me that demo, it kind of sent me back to problems that I had at Codename One, where I've just blogged about this recently. We had, like in our third year, we used App Engine, and we used it a lot for all of our servers and backend stuff. And it worked really relatively well up until that point. And at some point, billing just went crazy. You know, we used to pay $70 a month for billing, which was high, but okay. We paid $400 a month to Google for Gold support, which was really expensive, but we said, okay, let's pay that. And suddenly we got bills for daily usage of over $1,000, which is like from monthly usage of $70 to $1,000 a day. It's enough to bankrupt a bootstrapped company, you know? And that's insane. So we contacted Google's Gold support, and essentially we got the finger. They said, nah, it's a bug in your code. Now, I don't know if it was a bug. To this day, I don't know what the bug was. I don't. And I don't know if it was in my code or if Google released an update to App Engine that somehow triggered a bug that we had, or had a bug in it that essentially created a situation. I have no idea. And that's exactly the problem that Lightrun is solving. I didn't have the ability to ask my servers a question about how everything is built, how everything is running, if caching is working correctly at this point. You know, you could with a debugger, you could do it locally, but locally it wouldn't have helped me because the environment wouldn't run locally because it depended on the data store, which was part of the App Engine in the cloud, and the problem only manifested in production. So in production, which is essentially what matters, the area where we care about. I mean, I don't care if the system runs in debug mode. It's great, it should, but it's not the end goal. The end goal is for the system to run on the servers, and that's an area where we have only limited observability. We can observe the system externally, but we can't dig into it deeply enough. We can't get the same level of observability we have when we're running locally, and that's literally a crime. In this particular case, I was getting billed, I was going to run bankrupt, I was ripping out the few strands of hair I have left, and I had no idea. I was just guessing, throwing out code, writing more code, and you can't log because they bill you for logging. So, you know, you kind of, and that sort of helplessness that you feel in that particular case, that's what Lightrun is trying to say, to help you fix problems that are the worst kind of problems, the problems you can't possibly fix. And when I talk to Lightrun customers, I'm amazed by the level. Even richer companies, in our case, you know, throwing away $30,000 a month would have gotten us bankrupt pretty quickly. For companies that we're working with here, that's chunk change. You know, they wouldn't mind for that sort of level of failure. What they do have is amazing stories that go well beyond just the issues of cost. So some companies have systems that are so hard to debug that they accept things like 10% failure rates. You know, can you imagine a system that fails 10% of the time, and they just do, okay, let's run it again. That's the solution. Why? Because they can't debug it. It's too complex to debug. They can't reproduce it locally. It fails a lot in production, and they're blind. They can't see what's the problem. So their options are either rewrite the whole thing and hope that it doesn't fail like that next time, which is, well, failures tend to come back, or live with it. And we're offering a third option, and that's actually get the same level of observability that you can get now. And that's something that I think no one is offering anyway, and I'm pretty stoked about it. It's a completely new vertical that needs to be in every company, right? It's something that, like today, we can't really imagine ourselves without continuous integration. Back 20 years ago when I was working, there was no continuous integration. It didn't exist, right? It was something completely new. I remember when Mozilla first came out with their system, and we were all floored by the idea of, wow, they're building like that, Dynamic. Wow, that's amazing. And this sort of created new fields, new types of developers. DevOps didn't exist. SRE didn't exist. All of those things didn't exist. And I think that this is a new vertical that will see sort of create a new type of community, maybe new types of roles, and something that's essential for every company out there. And that's very exciting to me.
So how your observation power helped you to make things possible, and also how you are able to be focused every time, like you said, you're putting your eyes and your ears on things in order to absorb things, in order to understand it very well, and how you are able to reach the requirements of your clients using these qualities of yours.
So I'm assuming you mean my personal observation skills, not the observability capabilities of the product, right? So part of the thing here at Lightrun, one of the benefits that I have is being part of a larger team. And I don't need to apply that same level of observation that I would need at Codename One, where we're a smaller team. Here, there's a lot of backup in terms of different roles, each of which handle a different aspect of customer communications, of extracting the needs from the customers, quantifying them to the market at large, and trying to sort of concentrate a single coherent set of tasks that we need to convert to actionable goals. So product is obviously doing a lot of that work, where we have a couple of people in that department whose job is solely just to decide where are we going next in terms of the product, and talking with the customers to understand what works and what doesn't work, and talking with future customers to understand what will make them pick up the platform and work with that. We also have other roles that are similar to that work with the customers and do that sort of thing. My role as a developer advocate is more of a community at large. It's more low level. I talk to developers individually and try to communicate needs from them into the company. Essentially, developer advocate is supposed to be the ears of the company and listen to people from outside the company who want to tell us things. And here I'm talking more about the developer level, actual people in the field who might be picking up Lightrun and who might never have heard about us, which is also a big market in that sense of people who need to either understand things about the company or want to communicate to us things that matter. And that's just being out there for developers and helping with understanding things that are relevant and applicable to us. Because one of the things I think that's important is today debugging, for instance, is one of those things where it's a skill that isn't really taught enough in general. And it's also a skill that's very deprecated in the community. So for instance, the other day I read a tweet from a guy that tweeted that if you do test-driven development correctly, then debugging is an anti-pattern. And I don't want to be disparaging. You know, I don't want to say something negative because I didn't have that same experience. I don't know what type of experience he had as a developer, but for me, when I do test-driven development, which I do, is that I spend a lot of time in the debugger trying to debug the tests mostly, because most of my failures aren't really bugs in the code, they're bugs in the tests. That's, you know, the way I see it when I write a test-driven development project. 90% of my, and that's a feel, I didn't check it statistically, but my feel is 90% of the bugs are in the test. And 10% of the bugs are actually bugs in the project that I found. And I spend a lot of time debugging that, and I use the debugger tool to debug the test. I don't just run the test over and over and hope that this time it will pass. I just use a breakpoint and inspect variables and use all of the tools that debuggers provide to us. And yeah, and I use logs too. I think logs are debugging. That's another thing that people say. They try to sort of create a sort of, oh, I prefer logs over debugging. Logging is great. And yeah, logging is debugging. It's part of that single thing. And Lightrun, by the way, has logs. That's part of it, because we think that's part of the project. And even more so, if you look at the debuggers, most debuggers in the IDE support logging. Most developers don't know that, but you can literally, there's an option if you enter the breakpoint to switch it to a log breakpoint, and it will log and print out stuff. People don't know that. And you can literally, in the debugger, change a breakpoint to be a log instead of a breakpoint, and at least in IntelliJ and most modern IDEs. And then you don't have to stop, add a log, rerun the project, etc. Just change it to a log. And so these are two things with different use cases, different values that are all good. And my job is to, the way I see it, is to educate people about the value of debuggers, because I think understanding how valuable debuggers are is a stepping stone to understand, okay, I love these here locally and these familiar tools, and how to use them better, these familiar tools. And then the next step is obviously, okay, using them in the cloud in production, also a good thing. So it's sort of, my job is sort of to educate, and to educate all the way through, also in general community knowledge and providing general value to the community.
So what is Lightrun?
So Lightrun allows you to debug your production server. You can essentially think of it as a debugger in production. And I'll try to explain it slightly differently than the way I explained it before. You know how an APM or an observability tool provides you some insight on your server. So those tools were built for DevOps people. You see sort of console with charts, and you can see this nice graph of how your server is doing, and you can see traces that show you all sorts of, okay, this web service is performing well, this web service has a failure rate, so forth. Great. So the thing is, where do you go next? If there's a failure rate, or if there's a performance peak or something like that in the APM, then the DevOps needs to go to the developer and say, hey, wait, there's this in the APM. Do something about it. Now, the developer looks at that and says, okay, now where's my tool? I can try and look at the code and guess why that happened. I can try to look at the logs and guess what happened. But I'm sort of, if I can't reproduce it locally and it's not in the logs, then my solution is I can add more logs. And then I have to wait, redeploy, and so forth. Not ideal. So Lightrun is the solution that lets you debug in the production. It's essentially, it's a plugin that you install into IntelliJ or VS Code. We're launching VS Code like at the end of this month. We're launching VS Code support. So, and one of the things that you can do there is you can just open the source file, literally your project source file, go to a specific line and place a snapshot on that specific line. And this will give you sort of like a debugger, stack trace, variable values, everything you'd get in a debugger for a specific line of code. So if you have a trace from an APM, it leads you in the general direction. And then in Lightrun, you can actually go at the source level at a specific line, not at a web service, which might include 20, 100 methods that are invoked there. We can go to one specific line of code. We can ask the value of a specific variable, which are the sort of things that you can't normally do with an APM, but you can do in a debugger if you were debugging locally. Here, you can do the same things that you can do in a local debugger in the cloud. And the value is you can do it at scale. So it's, if you have, for instance, 1,000 servers, like some of our customers do, and you have a bug that happens to a specific user, and because of the way clustering works, it doesn't necessarily happen in the same server every time, right? So Lightrun lets you place a snapshot or a log or something like that on a specific line of code with a condition for the specific user, and you can tag it so it will attach to all the relevant servers. And if the user this time hits a different server, it's okay, because the snapshot or the log will still be hit in that server, and you will get that result. You will get that information, and it's all directly into your IDE. So as a developer, you get that same level of deep observability that you can get locally, and you're still directly into your IDE. So essentially, it's like an APM, but designed for developers, not for DevOps. The analogy I give here is that a DevOps is kind of like an APM. The DevOps is kind of like the dashboard on your car. It tells you the speed, it tells you the RPM, it has the check engine light and all sorts of stuff like that. Really, really, really important stuff. But then when the check engine light comes up, you take it to the shop, you take it to the mechanic. The mechanic comes to your car, pulls out his own computer, specialized computer, connects it to the engine, and that gives him that extra information. And that's Lightrun. The dashboard is like the DevOps dashboard, but the developers need a tool that goes into the engine and tells you what's deep inside the engine and what's going on with this cylinder and that thing. And that's what we need. And so this isn't a tool that competes with APMs. It's a tool that sort of bridges that gap. I also, another analogy I'll give is kind of like the bat signal. Like an APM is sort of the bat signal. And I like this analogy because it says the developer is Batman, right? So the bat signal gives you a sort of a general direction, but you need to know where to go. And here we're Inspector Gordon or something like that tells you, okay, you need to go to that specific point, and the details that you need about this mission are that, this and that. And this is exactly the difference. We can't give you what the APM gives you. We don't have the big picture. We don't need to. That's an APM. That's a good thing. It has the big picture, and that's what DevOps guys need. We can give you, when you know what to ask, we can give you the information about that specific small area, which is what you care as a developer, about the specific niche, about the specific cut that matters, and sort of a great team-up story. You know, if we continue the superhero analogy.
Yeah, I understood with the car and RPM, this example. It is very clear. You explained it very well.
Thank you.
So how many people are using, how many developers are using this service, this plugin?
I have absolutely no idea. Right now, our target market are very large enterprises and things of that type. So it's not a metric that we check in terms of how many developers work. I'm sure there's other people here that check that metric. Lightrun is a relatively new company, so getting the information about it out and getting people to know about it will take time, and it's something that we barely started with. Currently, most of our users are enterprises that picked it up, and there's some big stories like Tabula, which you can see on the website. There's this great video there where they talk about the value that they derive from it, and lots of other companies that you can also see the logos featured there. I'm not sure which ones I'm allowed to talk about too much, but they're big companies, and in some cases, some of the deals that we're seeing coming in, they're huge. I'm talking millions of operations per second and stuff like that, which is insane amounts of logs that they're already outputting to their existing servers. So it's the amount of information that some of these customers are processing is so huge. And so that, to give you a scale, if we can just save them from outputting a few logs, it's thousands of dollars worth of money saved on just logging storage, just on that. So these are big customers, and they're already relying on it, and they're the people that derive the most value for something like that. Because when you're a big company and you need to deploy something, the process to deploy is much more difficult. So if you're a developer in a big company and you want to add a log just to see, oh wait, there's a problem, I need a bit more logging, then the process to deploy is so slow and so hard and wastes so much developer time and costs the company a lot of money. So the value, the product essentially pays for itself, and it isn't a cheap product. So it's that's a general value proposition in these huge companies.
So what about security in Lightrun?
So there's a lot to talk about in security. It's an hour's discussion in its own right. There's, first of all, the security of Lightrun itself. Lightrun was validated by several security experts and was pretty thoroughly checked in that sense. It's also secure in the sense that the Light developers don't communicate with the production servers. One of the slides I have in my talks normally is that essentially the problem is today DevOps are responsible for production, which back in my day, production was just this sort of machine you'd literally walk over and kick it, and you'd hear the hard drive spin, so it's working. That was observability. So back then, we deployed to production, but production was kind of like a disaster. Today, production is guarded by DevOps, and the stability has risen considerably. We get 5 nines, and it's not something completely out of the ordinary. And back then, it wasn't at all. So the problem is we don't want developers to do something that will damage production. That's probably the first thing in terms of security. So the Lightrun server is something that's either deployed on-premise or in the cloud, but either way, the servers connect to it. So when you deploy the Lightrun agent into your server, it connects to the Lightrun server and communicates with that. Developers, when they develop, check with Lightrun using their IDEs, connect only to the Lightrun server. So for them, they have no access to production servers, none, no access whatsoever. DevOps is still 100% responsible for the production process, and the roles of DevOps are responsible for production, and developers aren't and don't have access to that. That's maintained. That clear line of separation, it's still there. But developers can now place things like snapshots and things like that into the production server. The thing is that those things are sandboxed within Lightrun, so they can't modify state. This is guarded against. If you try to put something that modifies state, it won't run. It won't change anything. It won't do anything. If you take too much CPU, and you can do that because you can do conditional breakpoints and stuff like that, you can add expressions. Like you can log things like hit this line and then have an expression in it, like and literally call a method within that expression and print out the value of the method that the method returns. And that's really, really valuable. If you want to add a log that prints out a return value of a method, you can do that. But if you take too much CPU, the logging will be stopped, paused for a few cycles. So you can't crash the servers by logging too much or placing too many snapshots. You can't do it inadvertently or on purpose. And those are very important things in terms of security. And because essentially your servers are still 100% behind the firewall, behind everything, and only they communicate outside to the Lightrun server, every element of security is still maintained. There's no potential room for weakness here. So, and obviously everything is on top of SSL with certificate pinning and everything. So all of those basic checkboxes for security are obviously in place, as well as all the authentication levels and role distributions and all the dotted I's and crossed T's.
So, as a developer advocate, you're part of one of the part of your job is to communicate and understand the needs and the requirements of the client. Before knowing about Lightrun, what do they ask you? What do their doubts are? What do their needs, and how you fulfill by telling the service that you have?
So it's not exactly my job, because there's a product and there's other roles that do that are more geared towards that. Although I do get asked that a bit, mostly because I was one of the early developers here, and because I'm a more public figure inside Lightrun, so people do contact me to ask these sort of questions, and generally it very much depends on the person asking. So for instance, the other day I had a long talk with a person who comes from a deep background of security, and he wanted to know how you can use Lightrun to debug security issues. And there's lots of great, Lightrun isn't a tool that was built for security, but because it's a general purpose tool, you can use it to debug lots of security related issues. You can place snapshots in various weakness places. You can validate if a system was infiltrated. You can literally inspect that in real time and see what's going on in terms of infiltration or an attack, and or validate a security weakness or bug report that you might have gotten. All of those things can be done with Lightrun relatively easily, even though it wasn't designed to be a security tool. It's general purpose. So every person that asks me essentially asks from his own specific set of experiences, and that's the last one I can think of. The one before that, mostly folk was from a company that dealt with performance, and he was concerned about performance. And the answer to that is similar to the one I said before about security. We throttle over usage and keep CPU down way down. So performance there is performance overhead, because obviously there's an agent, there is some things that happen, but by our measurements, it's well below 5% CPU in terms of well below, and practically no memory overhead, a very small memory overhead. So you can use it with almost no noticeable impact on day-to-day performance. When it isn't running, it's almost undetectable in terms of performance. So unless you actually use it in this particular case, it's mostly hidden. So those are the sort of questions I got recently.
So tell me, you as a co-founder of Codename One.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so Codename One is a very different type of company. Codename One is an open source company, so our code is literally out there. It's based on something that we started, Chem Fishbane, my co-founder, and myself, started at Sun Microsystems. When I started working with Sun, it was the late 90s, and Java, and I literally ported, I wanted to write a mobile application. Back then, mobile was Palm Pilots. I don't know if you remember those, probably maybe a bit young for that. There were sort of these pen devices, I guess, you know, not even mobile phones, but they were super cool. I had tons of them, loved them. And I was programming for those, and I hated programming them because it wasn't C, it was painful, it wasn't fun. So I said, I want to do that in Java. So there was a Java kit for that, but it was in Windows. And I sort of said, okay. So I wanted to work on Linux because I liked Linux. And so I ported the whole thing to Linux and got it working, wrote to the mailing list, like, hey, I got this running on Linux, it works great. And like an hour later, I get a call from Sun Microsystems, and, you know, come work for us. And okay. And it sort of moved on and snowballed from there. And eventually, I did there lots of stuff for mobile and things like that because the local development team was focused on the mobile area. And one of the things I got to do is that I worked on the wireless toolkit and things like that. And then my little best friend, who's Chem, was working on a project of creating a framework for cross-platform for all mobile devices at Sun Microsystems back in 2007, if I remember correctly. So he gave me a call. Before he started, he actually gave me a call and started consulting with me on that. And I said, you know, don't do that. It's too complicated. Don't get into that. It's one of those things that you get into and you never get out because it's so big. And he didn't listen to me. He just took the other advice that I gave about, okay, if you're already going to do that, then do this, that, and that, which he did. And then he called me up, and I came over, and he implemented something that was really nice. So they said, okay, why don't you join that team and start building that? And I said, okay, it's great working with him always. So I started working on that too. And we just kept building that and talking to customers about it and what were their needs for this, and we built Luit, which became very popular back then, just as the iPhone was coming out. But it only worked for J2ME and RIM devices later on for Android. So it kept running for a while, and we ported it to iOS and everything, but we couldn't get Sun or later on Oracle to publish that code for political reasons, not technical ones. So we really tried to push it from within Sun and later on within Oracle, but there's also was conflict with the JavaFX team, which felt we were treading on their territory, which they didn't have anything for mobile. Not back then, not today. You know, literally nothing that's tenable. But back then it was completely untenable, and we worked with the FX team, and some of my good friends worked there, and we tried to get it to work, and it was too slow, definitely for the devices back then, and too big. So eventually in late 2011, we both him and myself left Sun, Oracle by that time, and we started working on Codename One. And we essentially forked the project that we had at Sun, renamed it Codename One, changed a lot of code there. So, you know, there was a huge refactor, moved everything to different packages, kept the license because it's Oracle, you never know. But essentially sort of built on top of that, and also added build servers and things like that. So you don't need a Mac to build an iOS app. You don't need a Windows machine to build a Windows app. We added ports for Windows Phone, later on for UWP, for JavaScript, for desktop, and Mac, Windows, etc. And essentially created a complete environment for cross-platform that's essentially the most portable cross-platform environment ever made, to this day, I think. And it's essentially, it's been running for quite a while, and it's open source and also has a commercial aspect to it. There's literally a lot of stuff there that I can talk about, but you know, it's another hour of discussion in its own right.
So you're into Oracle, Java from long time, and I can see, I can understand it. So, and you're a Rockstar speaker. I can understand you're a good speaker, and you're an author, blogger, versus hacker blogs, and you also have a blog called talkto.dev.
Yeah.
Is that your own blog?
It's a blog that I started here to focus mostly because I have several blogs. Each one has a different sort of demographic it's aiming at, so people don't get boggled by noise. So for instance, in my Codename One blog, I write about Codename One stuff that might not interest the people who read Talk to the Duck. Talk to the Duck is a blog about debugging. It's more general purpose. So if I want to write something about Lightrun, I'd write it in the Lightrun blog. If I want to write something that's very general purpose, sort of production or debugging and things like that, that fits everyone, the wider audience, then I'd write it over there. Yeah.
So if I can understand, you are into everything, writing, speaking, and the technology side, and you are into communication side. So how you are able to handle all these roles completely? Each role have its own importance. How you are able to be perfect and be effective and productive in every role of.
I don't do everything concurrently. So when I write, I write. And when I speak, I speak. I don't do both at the same time. And speaking isn't something that really takes too much effort from me today. I used to do that a lot, and I still do that quite a bit. And writing either. I used to write blog posts every day for a period of time, and I can just churn them out without much difficulty. And that's kind of one of the things that comes with experience. You do that and keep doing it, and eventually you learn to sort of do a brain dump into the keyboard. And the same thing is true about speaking. I don't need to prepare in order to start talking and talking and talking. And as you can see, we're running down the clock pretty quickly here, and there's still a lot left to talk about. So it's not very challenging for me to do most of the stuff that I do, just because I've been doing it for so long. So yeah, and all of those roles aren't really different. When I speak about the technologies that I programmed. So I know the stuff, so I know how to program them, and I know how to write about that because I programmed it. It's just I developed additional skills of writing and of public speaking, mostly by practicing both of those specific skills. And initially when I started public speaking, I was terrible at it. And I actually thought I was good because I have a lot of confidence, which is something that you can't really, it's something you need to have. I don't know how to pass that along. I wish I could pass it to some developers because I know some developers who are wonderful developers and would be amazing speakers. And unfortunately, they're shy, not like myself. And they need, I wish I could give them some of my skill in that sense of my confidence. But I don't know how to transfer that. I had it naturally always. But to be an actually good speaker, that's something I had to learn. And that I learned through entrepreneurship. when I started my second company, I attended sort of an accelerator, and we did a lot of work over presentation to investors and things like that, and getting your pitch right. And that really, really helped me in condensing what I'm trying to say and working on my speech patterns, which were all over the place. I was a fast talker. I didn't pronunciate the things I was trying to say well enough. I didn't pause to take time to clarify my points, and I didn't stare at the camera properly. I didn't. I was a problematic speaker overall, and when I saw myself speaking next to other people who were better skilled and got the right feedback and got and practiced it, I was at first very embarrassed. You know, I thought about, oh my God, all of those past talks where I thought I rocked it, and I was awful. I was absolutely awful. But then, you know, like I said, you learn to take shame and throw it away, and you know, there's not much you can do about it. So shame is kind of like a waste of my life. So I got rid of that and moved on. And now I'm a better speaker as a result of that, because I'm not afraid to speak anymore. I'm shameless. And I also practiced that specific craft to a point where it's actually reasonable and I can talk without it being too embarrassing.
So what is your average accuracy in all these roles?
Accuracy?
Yeah.
I'm not sure I follow that. Maybe it's an idiom I'm not familiar with. Accuracy for a role?
Yeah.
You mean if the role matches me more? Maybe?
I mean, you are able to handle different roles, how accurate you are, how focused, or how much calculated and analyzed, and
So
in terms of thinking, and presenting yourself in different roles.
So I think of all of those roles as a single role that has many facades. So kind of like a facade you would have in programming, where essentially the core is still me. All of those roles are me and the way I present it. And when you're seeing my writing is me. It's just me on the paper. And when you see me speaking or doing a presentation, that's me, only in video or or within the presentation. When you see my code, it's definitely me. So all of those things are just facades of a single person with with a set of abilities to execute on those different facades. But all of those specific things are things they're muscles you can train. Okay, you can become a better writer just by writing and keeping on writing. You can become a better speaker by practicing that and by having people who know that art teach you that. And the same is true about writing. There's great books about writing. There's lots of information about that and how to improve your writing skills. There's tools, there are automated tools that are amazing about improving your writing style and getting more to the point. All of those things are skills just like programming skills, which you can improve just by doing them and studying the written material on the subject. So I think I'm doing okay and constantly improving in all of them.
So I'll conclude by asking two to three questions.
Okay.
Yeah. So what are the advantages of using Lightrun?
Being able to instantly observe what's actually happening in your system in production And that's something that nothing else can possibly offer, not that level of surgical precision and letting the developer observe. That's a huge, huge part there, because up until now, observability was limited to DevOps. And this is a developer level observability tool that lets you find the bugs in their place, and the ability to rid your system of bugs. That's an advantage that I think no other tool can come close, especially in production, because there's lots of tools to help you find bugs, but most of them are during the development cycle. Very few go to the production level, and that's where it matters. And those are the worst kind of bugs.
So, as a problem solver, as a person who is into programming, as a developer advocate, I'm sure you might have faced, experienced a lot of bugs. So, what do you say to the people who are watching and listening to our conversation, especially to the developer advocates? What do you say? Your experience, your valuable advices will help them in making things possible.
In terms of solving bugs, or in terms of career?
Yeah, in terms of solving
bugs. Well, I have this kind of huge series about this, the debugger checklist, which essentially goes over the process to solving bugs. But I'll summarize it for you in like 2 sentences. Validate your assumptions. Check again. Literally, because bugs are just a process of debugging is the process of validating assumptions. And the bugs that are hard to find, lots of bugs we go there and we look at it and, oh, it's clear, found it, that's it. But the bugs that are hard, the ones that you start digging into and ripping your hair out and not understanding, that's because usually we assumed something incorrectly, and then we kind of got stuck looking at the wrong place. And one of the tricks here is actually rubber ducking, which is the process of taking a rubber duck and telling him about your problems, which is the process you can talk literally to anything, to an inanimate object, or to a friend, talk about the problem. But then the basic thing is you need to walk backwards, start, validate assumption 1, the system at the most highest level, validate that this basic thing is working, then this thing, and slowly narrow down. Because lots of times we skip or we don't do the test correctly to validate the assumption, and something goes through the sieve, and we miss the bug in those tiny holes that you have in the sieve. And essentially, you need to narrow down, like you're hunting prey in that sense, where you come after it from all directions and try to, like the lionesses do when they hunt, when they run and chase the prey here, and their teammates are on the other side. So you need to do the same thing for bugs. You need to slowly narrow down the area and circle it until you find it. And we sometimes rush too quickly to the center because we assume it's here, because that's where the symptom is. And that's not the right place necessarily. If you don't find it immediately, then you missed something and you need to start validating.
So is there any particular way that worked for you, that works for many people, in order to reduce the effort and time and save the time to solve the problems?
Well, experience is probably the best way most people learn how to, but that's obviously kind of a cop-out. So I'll try to be more proactive here on things you can actually do in the short term. Essentially, you need to get toolings right. And it means doing style checks and stuff like that, doing automated tests, preventing bugs from even appearing to begin with. So for instance, a small thing like having a style check that prevents you from doing a try catch without printing out the stack trace, things like that. That's a small thing to add, so that will be checked when you commit code, that it won't allow you to commit that code. That's a bug, because when that will happen, you won't know, and you will spend hours looking for it. And these are small things you can easily do. Having basic logging for all of the important areas. When something fails, you do see the logs, having decent tests. All of those things are the starting points for finding a bug, that they help you. And they don't, by the way, they don't contradict using Lightrun. I think they're part of a holistic view of using everything that we have at our disposal to prevent bugs from ever happening, right? Because that's a true value. But obviously, there's lots of types of bugs. There's performance bugs, there's actual crashes, there's cache misses, which can cost us thousands of dollars, as I've talked about before. There's a huge range of bugs. So we need to use every single tool to our disposal: CI, code reviews, everything that we can, and just use it more effectively and take it seriously. Sometimes in code reviews, I see people focusing on nonsense, like, oh, your style here, or the variable naming and stuff like that. I don't care about that. Don't waste the time, because when you do that with code review, you essentially make code review unpleasant. You make people feel like they're being criticized for their code. Use code review to find things that would actually improve the code, that will make the process pollinating to the other party, right? So in code review, give a review like, that's good, but maybe if we store this value in a variable, and instead of doing it in one line, which is more concise, do it in 2 lines. And if we have a failure, we'll have a more accurate bit of information about which line is responsible. Because, for instance, a small thing like writing more concise code seems really cool as a developer. I want to write less code. Who doesn't? I want to write fewer lines of code. But no, that's a problem, because if you do that, and you get a failure, and you get a stack trace at line X, then you don't know if it's the first part of line X or the second part of line X, and now you have to go back and start figuring out which one. And a good code review would look at that and say, okay, that's nice. You wrote a bit less code. Maybe don't do that. Maybe break that down a bit. Maybe write a bit more code and do it in a way that we can later on figure out what caused the failure more precisely.
So if you send me your links, your web links, I'll put in the description of this video. People who find our video on YouTube can see about Lightrun and about Code One.
Yeah. Dev up there. That will work.
Yeah, it will be useful for developers. At the same time, the people who don't know about Lightrun can understand, can use the service, can implement in their business.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, and also as a developer advocate and as a co-founder of Lightrun, and as a co-founder of Codename One, what is your observation about this conversation? What do you say about my performance and my questioning in this conversation?
Good questions. It was fun talking to you, and I enjoyed it. Thank you.
And what do you say about my videos on YouTube? Have you seen any videos of mine?
I'm sorry, I just briefly looked at them. I just don't have as much time as I used to. I have this pile of books that I'm supposed to read right now that's been sitting on my desk for a few weeks, and I feel bad about that, because I asked the admin head to buy them for me, and now I feel obliged to read them, and I finish books really quickly, and I haven't finished any of them. Actually, I finished one, but I just don't have as much time to view things and listen to things as I used to. I'm actually right now I'm a bit late for the next conference I have as we speak.
Yeah, the last question is last one. I just wanted to tell you, because you are into IT from long time. I just want your observation. Uh, I do interviews of people who are into different professions, not only tech, non-technical people. I did more than 500 interviews, and people who are into IT industry who have 25 to 30 plus in experience, and also people who are into other professions who are aged about 50 to 60, 70, 13 to 18 plus, all age groups, all country people, different backgrounds, different cultures. They are there on my show. So I did masters in software engineering and graduation in computer science and engineering. So how do this video series and interviews with different country people who are into different profession and technology people, like great people like you? So talking with you, what do I add value to my resume or my career?
Mhm. I don't know really. My specific career path was very different to yours, and I think our generations are very different in that sense. We, my daughter was shocked that YouTube didn't exist like 20 years ago. That it wasn't there. So obviously it's uh, you know, it's difficult for me to imagine the type of path that you're going with today compared to my own, and the type of experiences and how you can communicate that. You know, it's so any insight I give you would be, you know, from my own bias and probably not as valuable.
So yeah, thank you for your words, and thank you for spending your time here on my show. Can I put this video on my YouTube channel with your permission?
Sure.
And also, can I put this video and audio clip on my podcast, website, internet, social media, everywhere with your permission?
Sure, no problem.
Yeah, thank you, Shai. Keep going, keep doing what you love.
Thank you. Have a nice
Bye.
day.
Bye.